Hello, I'm Dr. James Bogash, expert in health and longevity and creator of Bogash Life and Balance. And today we're going to talk about what you should be eating for breakfast, and we'll probably touch about why you should be eating breakfast. But for pretty much ever, and this all has to do with protecting your brain, not protecting everything, but the brain should certainly be on the list of things you want to protect. But this has to do with prediabetes is probably the #1 contributor to poor brain health. Things like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, clearly on the list. Even things like tinnitus or tinnitus or ringing in your ears, hearing loss. Prediabetes plays a role in much of what goes on with the nervous system. And so basically, what should we be eating for breakfast to avoid diabetes or eat a lifestyle that's not consistent with diabetes? And I've always recommended a protein or very high fiber based breakfast. Since the protein breakfasts are basically easier, that usually what I recommend. That means things like oatmeal, except for the overnight, like all your quick Quaker type oatmeals, they're just junk. They're not good for you. Cheerios are not good for breakfast because they are almost entirely carbs. We should not be very carb heavy for breakfast. And yet you look at pancakes and French toast and waffles, bagels, croissant, like those are all carb-based breakfast. But in this particular study, looking at almost 3,000 people, at the time of the study, they were between 55 and 93 years of age, and they followed them for about 9 years. And to show you how off a lot of people's breakfasts are, the heavy fat-based breakfast, so like you bulletproof coffee people out there, 11.5% had a fat-based breakfast, or fat was the dominant macros. Protein, 12.8%, and carbs, 75.7%. So almost 76% of people's breakfast were carb-based. So we're really, in general, approaching this from the wrong standpoint. But what they found was that the people that were carb-heavy breakfast had a greater decline in cognitive ability over the time of the study. So if you want to protect your brain, we need to ditch the carbs or at least balance them out with some protein and fat. So some suggestions for me: real peanut butter on true whole grain bread is important. Nuts. You can have chicken for breakfast. You don't have to have traditional protein-based or traditional, eggs, even though eggs are on the list of protein-based breakfast. It doesn't have to be a traditional breakfast. I already mentioned eggs are good. High protein-based yogurts. So I'm not a terribly big fan of dairy. This is the one time that I kind of stray from that. So you like your Fagi or any other one that has a really high protein content. The problem with yogurt is you start getting into your Yoplait and your stuff with a lot of sugars added in. Those are the ones we need to avoid. If anything, if you're going to do yogurt, do plain yogurt, add your own fruit into that. It's going to be the best option. So then the question is, breakfast at all? Should I even eat breakfast? And certainly brings up the concept of fasting or time-restricted eating. It is very clear, two things are very clear in the medical literature, and that is that skipping breakfast, so if you're going to skip breakfast and eat dinner, it's not going to have a good outcome. Obesity, diabetes, all of those things are going to be much greater if you are skipping breakfast and eating meals later. When we look at time-restricted feeding, those are very much in line with that as well. If you're going to skip a meal, you'd be better skipping the evening meal, not breakfast. So that shift needs to be towards the morning, not towards the afternoon and evening. Those are two very clear things. So I generally strongly advise my patients to eat breakfast, even if it's just a handful of raw nuts. The only exceptions I am okay with is if you are being very physically active while you're skipping a meal. And like for me on Saturday mornings, I go train kickboxing, jiu-jitsu, and I'm not eating my first meal till about 11:30 or 12, but I'm very active during that time frame. Those are one of the few situations that I'm okay with skipping a meal. And all too often people skip breakfast and just call it fasting, and that is not what we talk about when we're talking about intermittent or time-restricted fasting. As always, I'll post a link to this particular study in the description. Make sure you like this video, share it with somebody who you think needs the information, and subscribe to the channel.